Practical lighting is a concept of smuggling in actual lights in the frame of the shot in one way or the other to create a sense of realism, possibly to motivate some other artificial light sources and just to make the scene feel more dynamic. In this scene, I've already set up a bunch of such practicals. You can open the Practical Light 01 collection, then the drivers subfolder, find the lamps _ control 01 object and jump into its object settings to scroll down all the way to custom properties. There you will find the power, hue and saturation controls for all the practical lights, L01, 02, 03 and so on, representing each practical in the scene. Feel free to play with it to see what is what, but basically what I'm gonna do is light up these lamps, LEDs and stuff like that with keeping the light ratios in mind. In my opinion, it shouldn't be brighter than our sunbeam to not break the proper light ratio that we have established. So I'm just using these practicals for decorative purposes as a few light pools here and there, and maybe to enhance the sense of realism at the same time. It should be possible to change the hue and saturation of every light if needed. It's set up via Blender drivers, which we won't go into, but basically you have all these sliders exposed. Sometimes to make cycle slightly faster, I draw a render region with Ctrl B around some portion of the viewport, like here. Okay, I think that the level is okay for the flashlight thing compared to the sun hotness. It looks reasonably low power, let's say. Okay, now we can enable the second lamp. Tweaking L02 power lights up this panel at the top of the robo's head. And again, I imagine it would be fairly dim. At least I want it to be not too distracting to preserve the light ratios that we have established. Then there comes the rest of the practicals, like this micro LED, a tiny dot of visual interest. And on the side, we should have yet another LED indicator. So let's tweak it as well. I think it starts looking extremely cool. I love such details. It may seem almost unnoticeable, especially when it is a pinpoint light source somewhere here, but the sum of such nuances will make the lighting feel rich and layered eventually. That is definitely worth the hassle if you ask me. Although our practicals exist right within the frame of the shot and are part of its ambient narrative, a part of our robot character in fact, their effect can be multiplied with the help of some artificial lights. But first let me light up the most exciting part, which is the sensor's backlighting. Look at this. This should be a magnet for the viewer's gaze. The windows to the soul, and blah blah blah, and just some attractive contrasts in there. I'm giving it a bluish hue as a complementary color to the warmer room tone to play with the contrast of temperatures as well. There are a few types of contrast, as we remember: the value contrast between light and dark, the color contrast between warm and cold, and some other, like the contrast of atmospheres. Let's see how the practical lighting looks on its own though. Aside from shining directly into the camera, the effect on the surroundings is quite subtle. These sources don't really illuminate anything at all. If need be, the effect can be multiplied with adding some artificial extra lighting. It shouldn't always be the case, of course, because sometimes practical lights are just fine on their own, but sometimes we can still enhance it a little bit. If you have a look in the outliner, here we have some extra lights in the extra_01 collection. It is a bunch of point lights basically to bring in some more exposure to these areas affected by practicals. So it's like a really subtle supplementary lighting thing. I am extremely careful to not overdo it though. You should probably be careful too. The amount of lighting spread around should always correspond to the perceived brightness of this particular source to make it believable. Otherwise, it'll just crumble. Okay, the hue of every such omnilight should also line up perfectly with the hue of its parent, for pretty much the same reason. So here at the top we have a tiny area light shaped like the lamp itself. It is slightly more interesting this way, I believe, but nothing too fancy really. Just a little bit more light radiated on the surrounding areas of the model. Following the same logic, the point light near the lenses offers some exposure for that area. Imagine that we are taking the bluish backlighting of the lenses as an inspiration and extending this concept a little bit. It's okay as long as it's motivated by something. And here we have one more light underneath the glass to imitate an LED indicator or something hidden in there. I thought it would be cool if we could see some of the details there. It goes along the lines of realism as well. These LEDs is something that we expect to see when it comes to embedded electronic parts like this compartment. So it's a blend between aesthetics, let's say, and realism. The color of this light can be anything, but I'm staying faithful to more or less neutral hues though. So that was the extra lighting to help sell our practicals so they have more effect on the model. It's not a necessary step though, diving into such details and stuff like that, but I thought it's worth experimenting with. A comparison incoming. This is our raw practicals, plus the extra lighting touch. Think of it as layering or scattering extra points of high contrast, which are motivated by stuff like lamps and sensors and LED lights. I think practical lighting is a really exciting part of filmmaking that we need to culturally appropriate as 3D artists. That's my take on it anyway. After switching on all the lights, I really dig the complexity the practical lighting adds to it. There is still one thing that throws me off a bit. I don't really like one of the extra lights that we added. Is it this one? Yeah, I think it's a bit too strong. Not a big deal though, it's just my obsession with details. Alright, all feels good now, I think. What do you think? Do you like it more with practicals? Does it feel more satisfying with these extra points of interest scattered around? I think it does. I think it does. Such layering is a part of what creates depth and dimension. What is important is to keep the light ratios in mind though. It is tempting to make every practical super hot and punchy, but we shouldn't do it, and that is why. I'm gonna demonstrate it with the help of the glare effect, which helps to see what's truly bright. And now basically the sun is still the most powerful source, and the practicals look rather dim in comparison. That is a good dynamic range. It is nice and wide, and we just understand the light ratio. If we made the practicals way brighter, that would put it on the same level as the sun, and then the glare will pick it up and it just becomes ridiculous, at least in my hierarchy of light values in this scene. The multiple 100 watts mini flashlights right there. To sum it up, at all stages of the lighting workflow, it is worth remembering about the dynamic range. If the sun output is, say, 100 units, then making this small lamp pump out the same 100 units is a bit strange, as it flattens our dynamic range. The uncanny valley says hi. To maintain the realistic light ratio, it would make sense to rather limit the output of this lamp to something like, roughly speaking, I don't know, 10. You got the point. And these lights, don't know, 0.5. While the sun is a solid 100. That will expand the dynamic range rather than collapsing it, and it will ultimately look believable. Something like that. That is it for the first round of practicals attached to our character itself. We can do more though. We can smuggle some practicals into our film set as well. Let's see how it goes.